The air is cool and thick with morning fog, the kind that clings to your skin like soft linen. You walk slowly, each footstep cushioned by old stone and scattered leaves, worn smooth by centuries of quiet footsteps and forgotten whispers. Somewhere, far off, a bell rings, but it's muted like the building itself is still deciding whether to wake up. Ahead of you looms a grand structure, part courthouse, part relic. Its pillars rise like tired arms stretching at dawn, their white paint flaking in soft curls. Ivy hugs the lower walls as if trying to keep the building warm. You approach slowly, your fingers grazing a brass plaque that's so tarnished the letters are barely visible, but the year reads clear enough. 1849. The heavy wooden doors creak as you push one open. It sounds like an old man groaning in his sleep. Inside, it's quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a secret's being kept. You step in, and the smell of paper, old wood, and time itself wraps around you. The floor beneath you shifts slightly, the boards remembering footsteps from long ago. There's a hallway ahead, dimly lit by dusty windows. Sunlight filters through in sleepy beams, like it's not quite ready to commit to the day. You follow the hall, hearing nothing but the distant tick of an old clock that seems determined to outlive history itself. You pass portraits that stare without judgment, half-faded faces with names mostly forgotten, and just then, in a corner niche, something catches your eye. A statue, no, too small, a bust, no inscription, just a face you don't recognize. But it watches you like it knows something. Something ridiculous. Something lost. You take a breath. The air feels older here, like it has a memory of its own. You exhale slowly, letting yourself sink into the pace of this place, into the weight of what once almost happened, but didn't. The fog outside begins to rise. You breathe slower now. The floorboards mumble as you step further in, each one sighing under your weight like an old senator with too many opinions and too little urgency. The hallway narrows, bending slightly, as if it was designed by someone who didn't believe in straight lines, or perhaps had a fondness for mild confusion. You pause at a door. It's plain, faded green paint, a brass doorknob worn smooth by time and politics, the kind of door you'd pass by 100 times without ever thinking about what might be behind it. You reach out. The metal feels cold, like it hasn't been touched in years. You turn it gently, then -CREEEEAAAK.O. That wasn't supposed to happen. That sound is so loud, it startles the dust. A few floating particles spin like startled dancers in the beam of morning light. You chuckle softly. Of course it creaks. Of course this forgotten door has perfect haunted house acoustics. It's probably in the original blueprint, one dramatically creaking door, included with every republic. You push it open, just enough to slip in. Inside is a small room, dim and warm, like someone once lit a fire here and never quite extinguished it. The walls are lined with books, their spines a kaleidoscope, of faded leather and gold leaf. A large map of the United States, dated, warped, and very wrong, hangs askew behind. A desk that looks like it should be guarded by eagles. And there it is, the desk, oversized, overbuilt, underused. Its surface is strangely empty, save for one item, a nameplate, dented, bronze, and still legible. You squint closer, and the name almost glows in the quiet light. David Rice Atchison. You pause. Who? You take a step back, and the floor creaks again in protest. The name echoes in your head, unfamiliar, like a misplaced file in a very tired archive. You listen for footsteps, for whispers, for anything that might explain why this room is here, and why no one ever mentioned it before. The air is still, the candle flickers low. The room welcomes you in its own awkward way, like an old professor who forgot your name but still wants to tell you a story. You step closer to the desk, its wood darkened by decades, maybe centuries of silence. A faint smell of tobacco lingers in the air, mingling with old paper and something vaguely lemony. Like someone once tried to clean but gave up halfway through. You run your hand along the surface. It's smooth in some spots, deeply scratched in others. There's a groove where a quill pen must have pressed down over and over, writing things someone once thought important. Maybe declarations. Maybe just lunch orders. The nameplate sits slightly crooked, leaning forward like it's trying to whisper to you. You read it again. David Rice Atchison. Still unfamiliar. Still strange. You glance around the room. There are no portraits of him, no medals, no plaques. Just this nameplate, and the kind of silence that makes your ears hum. You open the top drawer of the desk. It slides out stiffly, as if it's resisting your curiosity. Inside, a single folded piece of paper. You unfold it carefully, expecting something monumental, maybe a speech or a forgotten executive order. But it's a grocery list. Eggs, oats, pipe tobacco, ... and horse polish. You blink. This feels less presidential and more like someone got sidetracked on the way to greatness. You smile softly. There's something oddly comforting about it. Not every ruler has to be carved into marble. Some just pass through history like a warm breeze no one notices until it's gone. The desk seems to sigh as you close the drawer. The candle flickers, catching the brass nameplate once more. David Rice Atchison. You don't know him yet, but you will. Outside, the wind brushes gently against the window. You breathe slower now. A low shuffle echoes from the hallway, followed by the unmistakable clink of ceramic on ceramic. Curious, you step out of the office and follow the scent, earthy, nutty, warm. Someone's making coffee, and it smells exactly like the kind served in every government building since the invention of bureaucracy. Strong, questionably filtered, and oddly reassuring. You turn a corner and find him, an old man, hunched but cheerful, is leaning against a sideboard with a steaming mug in one hand and a crumpled newspaper in the other. He's wearing a janitor's uniform, the patch so faded you can't make out the name. But he looks like he's been here since the walls were painted red, white, and blue. He spots you, lifts the mug in greeting. You looking for the president? He asks, his voice like gravel that's been steeped in honey. You blink. The president. He chuckles, a soft, wheezy laugh. The other one, the one nobody remembers. He jerks his thumb toward the room you just left. David Rice President for, what was it? 45 minutes. Give or take a nap. You smile, unsure if he's joking. Oh, it's real, he says, sipping his coffee like it's a sacred ritual. Sort of. Depends on who you ask. One Sunday in 1849, nobody took the oath of office. Zachary Taylor didn't want to violate the Sabbath. So, technically, the Senate's president pro tempore was next in line. He grins. Atchison just sitting there, probably in his pajamas. You imagine it. A man snoring his way into power, surrounded by dozing clerks and half-empty inkwells. Somehow, it feels more believable than half the elections you've lived through. The janitor raises a brow. Don't worry, he didn't mess anything up. Far as we know, he didn't even notice. He takes another sip, nods solemnly. Now that's leadership. You both chuckle. The mug steams gently between his fingers. Somewhere down the corridor, a clock chimes noon, or maybe it's still morning. Time feels soft here, flexible, almost optional. The hallway settles again. You exhale deeply, and the coffee smell lingers like a memory. The candle flickers low. ... You drift back down the hallway, mind turning slowly, like a weathered weather vane in a gentle breeze. Senator David Rice Atchison. 45 minutes of presidential glory. Possibly. It feels like the sort of story told by a grandfather in a rocking chair who enjoys stretching the truth just enough to make you lean in closer as you walk. The floor creaks in lazy rhythm, almost like it's applauding this absurd corner of American history. You imagine Atchison waking up that morning in 1849? Maybe the light was slanting just like it is now, through worn curtains. Maybe he was more concerned about breakfast than bureaucracy. He wasn't supposed to be president. That job belonged to Zachary Taylor, of course. But Taylor, a devout man, refused to take the oath of office on a Sunday. It was the Lord's Day, after all, and he had priorities mainly, not breaking tradition or divine protocol. So there was a gap, a small, odd, silent space between one presidency and the next. And according to the Presidential Succession Act of 1792, the next in line, should no one else be available, was the president pro tempore of the Senate. At the time, that was Atchison. No ceremony, no marching bands, no adoring crowds waving tiny flags. Just a sleepy senator caught in the paperwork crossfire of a technicality. Some say he didn't even realize it happened. Others say he joked about it for the rest of his life. One version of the story has him sleeping through his entire presidency, which if true would make him arguably the most efficient executive in U.S. history. You pause in front of a window, watching dust dance in the sunlight. The idea is so ridiculous, it's kind of beautiful. For 45 minutes, the nation had a leader who asked for nothing, signed nothing, and simply existed. And somehow, that makes him unforgettable. You smile gently. The light outside softens, wrapping everything in a warm, honey-colored hush. The candle flickers low. You descend a narrow staircase now. The steps shallow and uneven, carved into the rhythm of careful feet over many sleepy years. The air down here is cooler, touched with the scent of aged stone and wax. Somewhere nearby, a grandfather clock ticks not hurriedly, just enough to remind you time is passing. But it's in no rush. As you reach the landing, your fingertips graze the railing worn smooth by generations of hands that came before you. You can almost hear them whispering. Senators, aides, historians, janitors, all of them brushing against this odd tale with disbelief and delight. The Sabbath, they say, was sacred, especially in 1849. Zachary Taylor, having been elected president, was ready to take office, but not on a Sunday. He refused the oath, firmly, politely, possibly while holding a cup of tea. Because of this conviction, the official transition of power was delayed, and in that small delay, the Republic blinked. Constitutionally speaking, the presidency was vacant. Q. Atchison. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't even controversial. It was more like the government set its alarm for Monday and decided to snooze through Sunday. Still, some legal scholars called it a loophole. Others called it a myth. A few probably called it not my problem and went back to their crossword puzzles. But there it was, a single day, hanging in limbo. It's odd to think a government so often tangled in bureaucracy could overlook such a fundamental detail. And yet, no coup, no panic, just a soft constitutional shrug and a man in Missouri, likely adjusting his cravat. You sit on a worn bench near the wall. It creaks gently under your weight. The Sabbath swindle, they called it half joke, half historical curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, the most peaceful transfer of power that never really happened. The stone walls hold the cool of centuries. You breathe in deeply, and the clock ticks once more. The candle flickers low. You wander into a small reading room, lit only by a high window, where light slips in like a secret. Dust floats lazily in the air, unbothered by your presence. A faded armchair waits in the corner, plush, deep, and clearly meant for daydreaming more than reading. You sink into it, and the cushion exhales a tired little puff of history. Imagine this: David Rice Atchison, the man of the moment, tucked in somewhere, maybe in his bed, maybe in his Senate office, maybe just leaning against a window, blissfully unaware that he has quite possibly become the leader of the free world. According to some versions of the story, Atchison never even knew he was president that day. Others say he found out after the fact and laughed himself breathless. And one particularly delightful tale insists that, upon being informed, he declared it the most relaxing administration in American history because he had spent it all asleep. 12 hours of technical presidency, no meetings, no signatures, no scandals, just one long nap. Honestly, it's kind of brilliant. While most presidents arrive with speeches and expectations, Atchison coasted through a technicality with the grace of a man deeply committed to doing nothing. He didn't even stand up. A true minimalist. And in some quiet way that makes it feel noble. Like the country itself took a deep breath between administrations. A pause, a heartbeat, a moment of unintentional serenity. You run your fingers along the edge of a side table nearby, where someone once carved initials into the wood, probably bored, probably waiting for something big to happen. They didn't know it already, had quietly off stage, in the form of a sleeping senator. The air is warm here, still, settled. You lean your head back against the chair, eyes half closed. The candle flickers low. The library is deeper than you expected. A maze of shelves opens before you, rows of leather-bound books stacked neatly, each one humming with the promise of certainty and the undertone of polite disagreement. The scent of paper and parchment is thick in the air, like a memory trying to stay relevant. You wander past volumes with gold-embossed titles. Presidential succession since 1789, interim executives and constitutional loopholes, American oddities, Volume 2. You run your fingers across the spines. Some feel smooth, some cracked, others unexpectedly warm as if they've recently been read by hands older than time. You pull one down at random. It opens willingly, the pages whispering like a courtroom gallery preparing for something mildly amusing. A chapter heading reads, "Was David Rice Atchison ever technically president?" You raise an eyebrow. According to this book, yes he was, for a day, or part of one, until Taylor officially took the oath. The next morning, Atchison held the highest office in the land, by default. Logical. Neat. Done. You smile. Simple enough. Then you notice the footnotes. There are a lot of footnotes. One cites an 1889 Senate transcript, where Atchison apparently laughed and called the whole thing a joke. Another references a Supreme Court clerk who argued it never happened because he wasn't sworn in. A third footnote simply says, "See Appendix B, things we all gave up arguing about." The law books, it seems, are tired, not from overuse, but from circular debates and low-stakes constitutional hair-splitting. You close the book and slide it back into place, somewhere nearby. Another volume rustles quietly as if preparing a rebuttal. Even the books here disagree with each other, but do so very, very politely. You inhale deeply. The paper smells like logic, dust, and mild confusion. The candle on the reading desk burns steadily, casting warm shadows across the pages. You feel your breath slow again. The candle flickers low. You follow the warm scent of polished wood and old ink into a round chamber, tucked quietly between two wings of the building. It feels like the kind of room where decisions are meant to happen, or at least be heavily debated before being forgotten altogether. Chairs form a loose circle, arranged like a book club that never quite agrees on which chapter to discuss. At the center sits a modest table, and on it a faded gavel, small and unimpressed by its own history. You pick it up. It's lighter than expected, like it knows its role here is mostly symbolic. A plaque nearby explains that this was once a side room for Senate strategy, mostly used when someone needed to argue without too many witnesses. The perfect place, perhaps, to explore the big question no one really wanted to answer. Who actually makes someone president when everyone else is asleep? You ease into a creaky chair. It groans under the weight of speculation, as if it too has heard this story one too many times. You can almost hear the voices of past legal minds echoing softly off the curved ceiling. He was never sworn in, one might say, tapping furiously on a constitution. But he was next in line, another whispers. And someone had to be in charge. Technically, someone scoffs in the corner, sipping imaginary tea. The debate flows quietly, more like a breeze than a storm. No one gets loud. No one pounds the table. They just circle the question like a tired carousel, going round and round until even the law books doze off. Eventually, one old voice chuckles and says, "I suppose we should have left a note." You smile, because in the end, no one truly appointed him. The country simply forgot to stop him. You sit back, letting the thoughts settle in, like warm dust in a quiet room. The candle flickers low, ... You drift toward a glass case at the far end of the room, where a yellowed newspaper rests under soft lighting. The glass is smudged slightly, like someone leaned in too close while trying to solve a puzzle that didn't want to be solved. The headline is unimpressive. In fact, it's practically indifferent. Presidential transition continues. It reads, in print so faded it might be whispering. Below it, a column buried near the fold. Senator Atchison presides. Scholars unclear. You tilt your head. That's it. No exclamation marks, no scandal. No massive portrait of Atchison waving from a carriage, surrounded by dancing bureaucrats. Just a shrug, printed in ink. As you read further, the article does its best to sound confident. It says Atchison may have technically assumed presidential duties for a brief window due to the delayed oath of President-elect Taylor, but it immediately hedges. Words like allegedly, possibly, and some believe start showing up like sleepy pigeons on a quiet ledge. It's as if the newspaper got tired halfway through the report and decided not to commit. You picture the editor holding the article up, sighing deeply, and saying, "We'll print it, but let's not make it exciting." The result: a story about a man who might have led a nation for less time than it takes to boil pasta, printed in a voice that seems to ask, "Are we sure this matters?" And yet, it was published. It made the papers. It slipped through the cracks of history just enough to survive. A blink on the page. A yawn in the record. Still, that blink matters. You lean closer, watching the letters settle into the grain of the paper like soft footprints in snow. You exhale. The candle flickers low. ... You meander down a quieter corridor now, where the walls are lined, not with paintings or plaques, but with framed footnotes. Actual footnotes. Tiny print. Long citations. The underappreciated whispers of historical literature. It's a hallway designed for the truly patient. One frame catches your eye. A small excerpt from an obscure 20th century textbook. While technically not sworn in, Senator Atchison is often humorously referred to as the 12-hour president of the United States. You pause, and the corner of your mouth lifts. There it is, not in headlines, not in statues, but preserved in the margins. A man who drifted into legend sideways, through an accidental technicality and a nation's collective sense of humor. It's amazing, really, how something as small as a quip, maybe from Atchison himself, maybe from a bored historian, can evolve into a curious bedtime story for an entire republic. You continue walking, the soles of your shoes brushing over marble tiles arranged like a crossword. The air smells of wax and linen, like a library in a church had an extremely polite child. Every few feet, another footnote, some skeptical, some admiring. One simply says, "This is disputed by most credible sources." You imagine the author typing it with a smirk. Then, immediately going for a nap, you reach the final frame in the hall. A cartoon. Atchison, half asleep in a rocking chair, wearing a sash that reads Commander-in-Chief maybe, and holding a coffee cup labeled World's Most Unaware President. It's gently ridiculous, and yet, It's stuck. Some legacies are carved in stone. Others are printed in tiny font with an asterisk. Atchison's is the latter, a sleepy side note that just wouldn't go away. You stop for a moment, letting the quiet embrace you. The candle flickers low. ... You push open a tall, drafty door and step into a room that feels like it belongs in a museum gift shop that never opened. A map of Missouri stretches across one wall, edge cracked at the edges, but lovingly restored, with little stars marking historic towns. There, tucked just above the Kansas border, you spot it, Atchison, Missouri. You smile. Of course they named a town after him. The walls here are lined with memorabilia, clearly curated by someone with an affection for both local pride and historical inside jokes. A cracked teacup labeled President Atchison's inaugural beverage sits next to a dusty photo of a man who may or may not be David himself. He's squinting at the camera like he's not quite sold on the idea of photography. A wooden placard rests on an easel in the center of the room. David Rice Atchison, the President, Missouri, remembers Evan, if no one else does. There's an air of affectionate confusion to the place. Not mockery, not reverence. Just a soft, civic shrug. He might have been president. He might not have been. But either way, he's theirs. A recorded voice plays faintly from a speaker in the ceiling, offering a guided tour in a soothing tone. Atchison served as president pro tempore of the Senate for years, and though historians debate his role in March of 1849, we here in Missouri choose to honor his service and his legendary nap. It's charming. You walk past a homemade quilt with little embroidered headlines. Missouri's maybe president. The man who slept through history and longest nap in government. Someone clearly had fun with this. The scent of cedar fills the room, calming and earthy. This is no shrine. It's a hug, a light-hearted exhale in a world of heavy-handed legends. And sometimes, that's more comforting than marble statues. You pause at the doorway, letting the warmth of it all linger. The candle flickers low. ... The next room is smaller, cozier, almost like a kitchen that history forgot. You step onto creaking floorboards and immediately smell something sweet, buttery, nostalgic. It's not real, of course, just the memory of cake, somehow baked into the woodwork. There's a table in the center, covered in white lace and surrounded by mismatched chairs. At its heart sits a glass display dome, and beneath it, an empty plate. The sign beside it reads, "Allegedly held the last slice of President Atchison's inauguration cake. Location of actual cake, unknown." You raise a brow. A cake. According to a very unofficial account, probably told at a county fair, and then adopted by someone's enthusiastic uncle, a few Missouri locals, upon hearing about Atchison's sudden rise to executive power, decided to bake a cake. Just in case. No witnesses. No photographs. Just a scribbled note in the town newspaper from 1893. A lovely lemon pound cake was made in honor of President Atchison. It was moist. That's it. No recipe. No National Archive mention. Just the word moist and the hope that someone had a good snack while America accidentally changed hands. You chuckle softly. It's oddly appropriate. Of all the presidents, real maybe, or otherwise, Atchison might be the only one whose celebratory dessert became a greater mystery than his legacy. You can almost imagine the scene. A quiet parlor, a few candles, mismatched china, and a cake cooling while the most accidental presidency in U.S. history floated briefly by like a warm breeze. You lean in to read the note. Again, still no cake. But maybe that's the point. Sometimes history doesn't come with candles or frosting or clarity. Sometimes it's just a memory of sweetness and a plate no one ever cleared. The room is still now. The empty plate catches a sliver of light. The candle flickers low. ... You make your way down a hallway lined with portraits, some grand, others suspiciously vague. A few look like they were painted from memory. by someone with a very generous imagination. But one in particular makes you pause. There he is again. David Rice Atchison, or at least, someone claiming to be. He's seated awkwardly atop a horse, looking slightly unsure about the entire idea of horseback riding or power. A placard underneath reads, "Possibly David Rice Atchison, arriving at the Capitol March 4th, 1849, or possibly not. The horse's name was Jasper." You can't help but grin. The legend goes like this. Atchison rode to the Capitol that Sunday with 3 horses and a gavel in his saddlebag. Why 3 horses? No one knows. One theory suggests he was showing off. Another says he didn't trust any of them entirely. The truth is probably simpler. Maybe he just liked options. He arrived, nodded politely, and took his usual seat in the Senate chamber. That gavel. Never used it that day. Or maybe he did to swat a fly. Sources conflict. One second-hand account claims it was borrowed from a judge who later demanded it back on principle. Another says he lost it behind a sofa. The point is, for a man potentially assuming the highest office in the land, Atchison had the energy of someone who was mostly hoping not to be bothered, and honestly, you respect that. The gavel now sits behind glass in a side displace, mall, unassuming, lightly nicked. Not exactly the sword of power, but it makes a gentle thump when tapped. You run your finger along the glass. It's cool to the touch, smooth, from generations of curious hands. Outside, you hear the faintest sound of hooves. Or maybe it's just the old pipes. You smile. Jasper would have liked that. The candle flickers low. ... You step into a room that feels both important and strangely relaxed. It has the air of a place built for serious decisions, but one that hasn't seen action in quite some time, like a chessboard set up for a match no one showed up to. The carpet is thick and faded, patterned with stars that seem to stretch, just a little too far apart. A large desk anchors the room, topped with nothing but an empty inkwell, a crooked blotter, and a small stack of blank parchment. You run your hand along its surface. No scorch marks, no claw marks, no urgent notes, scrawled in frustration, just calm. A soft plaque on the wall reads, "Office of the President, Pro Tempore, 1849. Room reserved for symbolic purposes." Symbolic, indeed. For one sleepy Sunday, this room may have belonged to the President of the United States. But no meetings were held, no papers signed, no urgent dispatches received. Instead, legend says, Atchison spent most of the day stretched out on a nearby sofa, boots off, coat unbuttoned, and absolutely, gloriously unbothered. There's even a quote though, its accuracy is suspect, that he once said, "I took no oath, made no speeches, ordered no troops. I was president, and I enjoyed it, for I had nothing to do." A rare kind of leadership. You walk over to that same sofa, still here, after all these years. The fabric is worn in all the right places. You sit down gently. It sighs under you, like it's grateful to finally have company again. You imagine Atchison here maybe eating something from a napkin, maybe humming a hymn to himself, maybe napping with one eye barely open. No pressure, no headlines, no fuss, just one man, in one chair, on one peculiar Sunday, doing gloriously nothing. You lean back. The silence feels earned. The candle flickers low. The sunlight has softened now, casting long syrupy streaks across the floor, as if even the day itself is winding down. You find yourself in front of a modest wardrobe tucked behind a velvet curtain. Its doors are half open, revealing garments that speak more of Sunday sermons than statecraft. There, on a cedar hanger, is a black coat, modest, woolen, and just slightly too plain for someone about to accidentally lead a nation. Legend has it that David Rice Atchison, expecting a quiet Sabbath, dressed for church on March 4th, 1849. He donned his best Sunday clothes, the coat you're now looking at, a vest with slightly crooked buttons, and a cravat that was never tied quite right. He didn't plan to lead. He planned to pray, maybe take a nap, maybe stop by for pie later. But fate, or rather the Constitution, had other ideas. While Taylor refused to take the oath until Monday, and with no vice president on deck, Atchison was next in line, technically and unintentionally. And so, in his church-going attire, he became by default, by omission, and by bureaucratic scythe, acting president of the United States. You can't help but admire the simplicity of it all. No motorcade, no inauguration band, just a guy, in his Sunday coat, who wandered into history, like someone walking into the wrong meeting but staying for the snacks. You gently brush your fingers along the edge of the coat sleeve. It's soft with age and quiet dignity. The fabric smells faintly of cedar and thyme. He never changed clothes. He never made a speech. But for a brief and sleepy window, he held the highest office in the land. Dressed for God, not government, you step back as the wardrobe door creaks closed behind you. The candle flickers low, ... You step into a dim alcove framed by 2 columns, each etched with the faint outlines of names. Most are familiar Adams, Jefferson, even a Garfield or 2. But nestled between the lines is a blank space, intentional or forgotten, hard to say. Either way, it feels fitting. A small sign beneath it reads, Vice Presidency, 1849, position vacant. You blink. It's truth. There was no vice president on hand that Sunday. Millard Fillmore wouldn't take office as VP until Monday, right alongside President Taylor. Which meant, for that odd stretch of time, the usual line of succession simply fell asleep at the wheel. So who was steering the ship? You turn to find a carved bench along the wall. You sit slowly. The cushion gives like an old cat settling beside you. It smells faintly of leather, must, and wisdom reluctantly passed down. Technically, the Succession Act of the time placed the president pro tempore of the Senate next in line after the vice president. But with no VP around, Atchison was it. The whole bench. The fallback guy. The one who never expected the ball, but suddenly found it in his lap, while he was mid-nap. You look up at the wall again. That blank space somehow says more than all the names combined. It hums with the idea that sometimes the system works simply because no one's bothering to question it too loudly. You imagine a room of men in stovepipe hats blinking at each other on Sunday morning. Do we have a president? Technically. Should we call someone? Nah, he's probably resting. And so it went. You smile at the quiet chaos of it all, a gap in the plan, a pause in the procession, and a nation that somehow didn't notice, or didn't care. The candle flickers low, ... as you walk farther into the building's older wing. The floors change under your feet from marble to wood, to something that feels suspiciously like linoleum. History, it seems, isn't afraid to layer itself strangely. You enter a chamber that's both stately and slightly absurd. The ceiling is high and domed, acoustics perfect for echoing both powerful speeches and unfortunate sneezes. The chairs are arranged in semicircles, facing a central platform where, presumably, great decisions were once made. And yet, in one corner, framed behind glass like a priceless artifact, is a chicken. Well, a painting of one. Anyway. The plaque reads, commemorating the day a chicken entered the Senate chamber, date, unknown, impact minimal. It said, though with no small amount of side eyes from serious historians, that, during Atchison's time in the Senate, someone once brought a chicken into the chamber as part of a protest, or a prank, or maybe just as a poorly supervised lunch delivery. Accounts differ. Some say the chicken strutted down the aisle like a candidate. Others claim it flew into the visitor gallery, causing a minor flap and 3 overturned ink pots. One long-retired clerk, in an interview, decades later, claimed it laid an egg on the vice president's chair and received a standing ovation. Was it during Atchison's presidency? No one knows. But that hasn't stopped the story from settling into this sleepy timeline, like everything else around here in verified, unbothered, unforgettable. You glance back at the mural. The chicken looks proud, presidential even, and honestly, considering the chaos of succession laws, parliamentary confusion, and Sunday naps, a chicken presiding over the chamber doesn't feel entirely out of place. You exhale softly, your breath mingling with the stillness of this odd little corner of government. Somewhere overhead, a pigeon coos quietly, maybe in support. The candle flickers low. ... You find yourself in a quiet study, the kind with tall shelves, heavy books, and the kind of silence that practically begs for whispering. The windows are narrow, stained faintly by time, filtering in golden afternoon light that lands in long, thoughtful stripes across the floor. In the center of the room, resting like an old sermon on a velvet-lined pedestal, is a bound copy of the United States Constitution. Not the original, of course, but a beautifully reproduced edition, worn at the edges from too many careful fingers, turning its pages. You step closer and gently lift the cover. The pages make a soft sheen as they open. The ink is dark, the font elegant and precise. You flip through until you reach Article 2, Section 1, the rules of presidential power. You read, then you read again, and there it is. Or rather, there it is, single quotes, T. Nowhere in this careful, meticulous document does it explicitly account for what should happen when inauguration day falls on a Sunday and the new president refuses to be sworn in out of respect for the Sabbath. It's not that the Constitution forgot. It's just that, perhaps, it didn't think that far ahead. Like a very good recipe that left out one key step: what to do if your oven is busy praying. That sleepy Sunday gap, the one between Polk's presidency ending and Taylor's oath beginning, created the softest crisis in American history. No riots, no declarations, just a moment of silence so vague and uneventful that it accidentally gave rise to a man named Atchison, and the idea of a presidency defined by inaction. You rest your fingers on the page. It hums with importance, but now also with an endearing little wrinkle, a moment of constitutional forgetfulness, a pause in the parchment, a hiccup in the republic. You smile, gently closing the book as the air around you settles into velvet stillness. The candle flickers low. ... The corridor opens into a smaller room, simple and undecorated, where time feels a little thinner, like history came here to rest its feet for a moment and never quite left. You ease into a wooden chair near a window. Outside, everything is calm. A single tree leans slightly in the breeze, as if listening in. You imagine it's March 4th, 1849. In most countries, an unclear transfer of power might cause panic. Troops on alert, emergency meetings, grim-faced officials whispering in high-ceilinged rooms. But in the United States, on that particular Sunday, the most powerful office on earth was technically unmanned. No parades, no press conferences, just a quiet shuffle of feet in polished hallways and a few confused glances. And what did the nation do? Absolutely nothing. There was no emergency broadcast, no cavalry. The telegraph lines didn't hum with worry. Banks stayed open. Churches rang their bells. People went about their day, blissfully unaware that the country was, if only briefly, in a kind of constitutional limbo. Even the pigeons over Washington, one assumes, continued their business uninterrupted in a way. It's almost poetic. For 12 gentle hours, America ran on muscle memory, like a bicycle coasting downhill with no one on the pedals. And at the center of that nothingness stood, or more likely slept, David Rice Atchison, entirely unaware that he may or may not have been the acting president of a country that hadn't even noticed. You exhale slowly, feeling the comfort in that odd serenity. For once, an emergency that required no action, no alarm, just a calm, slightly ridiculous gap that history chose to frame with a question mark. You look out the window again. Nothing dramatic, just sunlight, shadows, and the breeze whispering through leaves. The candle flickers low. ... You enter a parlor filled with portraits, oil paintings in heavy frames, each bearing the expression of someone who absolutely expected to be remembered forever. Stern eyes, stiff collars, a lot of very serious mustaches. But there, tucked modestly near the fireplace, is a smaller frame. The paint is a bit faded, the subject seated rather than posed, and his expression, well, it's more amused than noble. David Rice Atchison, and what a beard. It's thick, full, and satisfyingly symmetrical. Not flamboyant, not scraggly. It's the kind of beard that says, I didn't mean to be president, but if it happens, I'm at least going to look well groomed. You step closer and admire the details. His eyes are soft, as if he's holding back a chuckle. His coat slightly rumpled. His hands rest loosely in his lap, not gripping a sword or declaration, just sitting, content, like someone who knows exactly how unimportant he was and is somehow completely at peace with that. It's said that when Atchison's accidental presidency became a bit of a running joke, he leaned into it. He didn't argue. He didn't correct anyone. He simply shrugged and said something along the lines of, I slept more during my term than any other president ever has. You can't help but appreciate the quiet confidence of a man who didn't chase power, didn't seize the moment, and still managed to be remembered mostly because of that. Beard, and a timing error. There's something endearing about it. Not all legacies are earned with battles or speeches. Some sneak in with a nap and a really good grooming routine. You take one last look at the painting. He seems to wink slightly in the firelight. You breathe in the scent of wood, polish, and old wool. The candle flickers low. ... You find yourself in a long room with a high ceiling and a large, oval table that dominates the center. It's the sort of table where serious conversations were supposed to happen, where men in waistcoats once leaned in, brows furrowed, arguing over matters of state, or perhaps over how strong the coffee had gotten again. Chairs line the table, each one slightly different in size and angle, like they've been dragged around by decades of restless minds. You take a seat. The cushion lets out a soft puff of dust, as if sighing at yet another visitor trying to solve an unsolvable riddle. A chalkboard leans against the far wall. On it, in faded script, someone has written, Was Atchison really president? Beneath that, a mess of scribbled pros, cons, arrows, and what appears to be a doodle of a man sleeping in a crown. This was the debate club, or something like it. Once upon a time, a handful of eager scholars, local historians, and one very persistent librarian met here every Tuesday evening to discuss the matter of David Rice Atchison's presidency. Some were convinced. He was next in line. Others scoffed. No oath, no title. One fellow brought cookies and simply said, It's fun. Let it be fun. The records show they voted on it at least twice a year. The result? Always a tie, always accompanied by light applause, polite disagreement, and more cookies. You run your hand along the edge of the table, tracing the faint etchings left behind, words scratched absent-mindedly over time. Maybe, sort of. Does it matter? And perhaps that's the answer. You sit back as the ceiling fan creaks overhead, spinning slowly, lazily, like the arguments it once heard. The candle flickers low. ... You step into a narrow room with cabinets, full of document-siloed papers, gently curled at the corners, their ink faded like dreams, just out of reach. A reading table sits in the center, under a soft green-shaded lamp, humming faintly, casting a pool of warm, quiet light. A curator's note on the wall welcomes you to the possibly presidential archives. The tone is apologetic, hopeful, and a little sarcastic. You admire that. On the table rests a single folder, already opened. Inside it lies one document, encased in a protective sleeve, dated March 4th, 1849, and at the bottom of that page, a signature. David Rice Atchison. You lean closer. The ink has bled slightly at the edges, smudged by time, or perhaps by a clumsy hand reaching too soon. It's a strong signature, slightly flourished, as if he wanted to make it clear, whether senator or president, his pen had presence. The paper itself is unremarkable. It's not a law, not a proclamation. It appears to be a requisition for extra cold delivery to the Senate wing. Nothing urgent, nothing presidential, just routine. But here's the twist. It's time-stamped, right in that odd little window between administrations. Historians have scratched their heads over this one. Was this the only known action taken by Atchison during his presidency? Was it official? Does ordering coal count as a policy decision? The answer, naturally, is maybe. You imagine him scribbling it out quickly, not knowing he was allegedly leading a country for that brief sliver of a Sunday. Just one man doing paperwork in a quiet room, unaware the world might someday peer at this page like it's a sacred relic. You smile. History is funny that way. You let the quiet hold you for a moment. The lamp's glow pools gently across the paper. The candle flickers low. The hallway opens into a gallery that looks suspiciously festive. Banners hang limply from the ceiling, faded red, white, and blue cloth draped like bunting left out in the rain. There's confetti sprinkled on the floor, long settled into the cracks of the wood, and the smell of something sweet and powdery like forgotten peppermint and dried out taffy. A small display in the center of the room catches your attention. It's a mandala diorama of a parade. Tiny wagons, little brass band figurines, paper-matched senators, frozen mid-wave. It's clearly handmade, lovingly so, and the sign reads, "Recreation of the 1849 unofficial Atchison Parade, speculative." You raise a brow. Speculative. Legend, or perhaps sheer optimism, claims that when news of Atchison's presidency reached his Missouri hometown, a small group of locals decided to celebrate. Someone pulled out a bugle. A farmer painted a wheelbarrow gold. A dog wore a ribbon. At least one child waved a stick with a sock tied to it, which everyone pretended was a flag. Was it a real parade? No one can prove it. The only photograph of the supposed event turned out to be a family picnic from 1863, featuring no Atchison and definitely no wheelbarrow of state. But that hasn't stopped the town from telling the story. Every few years, local school children recreate it during History Week. A plastic gavel is passed from student to student. Someone naps under a tree for comedic effect. And a lemon cake, because of course, is served with great ceremony. It's all gently absurd, which makes it feel oddly accurate. You look again at the little parade figures, frozen in their paper. Their joy is tiny, but sincere. Sometimes, we celebrate not because something important happened, just because it happened at all. The banners rustle faintly as a breeze slides through the room. The candle flickers low. You drift into a side room. That feels like a cross between a library annex and your favorite uncle's attic. Everything here is slightly off-balance chairs, with wobbly legs, shelves that lean with the gentle fatigue of too many anecdotes stacked on top. In the corner, there's a leather armchair with an end table beside it. A half-empty teacup rests there, preserved under a glass dome. The card beside it reads, "Allegedly sipped by David Atchison while retelling the story." Again, you chuckle softly. They say Atchison himself told the tale, repeatedly, with a smirk and the sort of casual delivery that comes only from someone who knows exactly how silly and strangely satisfying the story sounds. It goes something like this. "Well, boys," he'd begin, probably while pouring another cup, "for one day I was President of the United States. I took no oath, issued no orders, made no speeches, and slept through the whole thing. Best presidency this country's ever seen. and people loved it. Not because it was impressive, but because it wasn't. It was human, simple, oddly comforting. A man dropped accidentally into power, who didn't panic or pretend or puff out his chest. He just smiled, napped, and let the story ripple out behind him. Some say he exaggerated. Others say he invented it entirely. But the legend stuck, not because it was certain, but because it was charming. Even presidents especially, the maybe ones can be a little silly. And sometimes, the best stories are the ones no one can fully prove. You ease into the armchair, imagining the warmth of that long-gone teacup, the chuckles it heard, the years it watched pass like drifting smoke. You rest your head back, the cushions. Sigh. The candle flickers low. You now find yourself in a long, echoing corridor with arched ceilings and marble floors that seem to magnify every soft footstep like it's part of a forgotten drumbeat. The air here is cooler, quieter. The echoes sound unsure of themselves. Along one wall, a brass-framed clock ticks steadily, its hands moving with deliberate calm. It reads just past 12, but there's something odd about it. A sign below says, "This clock reportedly stopped for exactly 1 hour on March 4th, 1849, and underneath that, written in a smaller font, no one knows why, or if it even happened." You tilt your head. The story goes that around midday, during that uncertain Sunday of non-presidency, a clock in the Capitol building simply paused. Not broken, not rewound, just stopped. For exactly 60 minutes. Then, as quietly as it had stalled, it resumed, ticking. Some say it was divine timing. Others claim a janitor tripped over something. Still others insist that the missing hour represented a moment where the nation had no true leader, and even time itself seemed politely confused. You reach up and touch the cool brass of the clock's frame. It hums gently beneath your fingertips, as if remembering something but unsure whether to speak. Of course, it's all probably apocryphal. No official record confirms it. But it's one of those lovely stories that sneaks into museum tours and history club lectures, right between the real events and the probably not but maybe truths. And in a way, that one missing hour feels perfect. A blank space in history's schedule. A moment when the country simply took a breath. You stand beneath the arch as a soft breeze trails through the corridor, ruffling your sleeves like a whisper from another century. The candle flickers low. The next room is dim and cozy, draped in velvet curtains that muffle even your breathing. On a pedestal under soft light sits a simple object, an antique pocket watch, polished to a gentle sheen, its chain curled neatly like a sleeping cat. The sign says, believed to have belonged to David R. Atchison, said to have stopped at 11:58 a.m., March 4th, 1849, possibly. You lean in. The second hand twitches rhythmically, louder than it should be in such a quiet room. Tick, tick, tick. Each one a soft drumbeat, as if the watch is trying to remind the world of something no one else is quite willing to say out loud. According to one version of the story, Atchison's pocket watch paused just before noon on that curious Sunday. It stopped ticking, not because it was broken, but as the tale goes be, 'cause time itself hesitated, confused about who exactly was in charge of the United States for those brief, unscheduled hours. Did it actually stop? Who knows? Maybe the watch just needed winding. Maybe someone told a good enough story that people started believing it anyway. But here it sits, ticking again after all these years, caught between myth and movement. You picture Atchison reaching into his coat pocket, glancing at the face with sleepy eyes, shrugging, and going back to sipping whatever senators sipped on Sunday mornings. Perhaps tea. Perhaps something stronger. The ticking continues, steady now, confident, even, and just for a moment. You wonder if a single tick in time can carry this much mystery. How many others have slipped past unnoticed, their stories never told, never questioned, never celebrated for their beautiful absurdity. You step back, letting the sound fade gently into the folds of your thoughts. The candle flickers low. You open a creaky drawer in a writing desk. The wood warm beneath your fingers, worn smooth at the edges by years of curious hands and hesitant historians. Inside, wrapped in yellowed twine, are a handful of letters copies. You assume, though the penmanship looks fresh, like someone wrote them with care, hoping they'd be found by just the right kind of quiet thinker. You take one and unfold it. The handwriting is neat, but casual, the ink soft at the edges. It's a letter from David Rice Atchison, dated a few years after the fabled Sunday. It's addressed to an old friend, and in it, he retells the story of his so-called presidency. They say I was president for a day, it begins, but I reckon I was asleep for most of it, and didn't sign a single paper, nor give a single order. If that's the way to lead a nation, I may have set the standard too high for future men. You chuckle softly. The tone is warm, self-aware, playfully dry. Another letter reads more seriously. He admits to being surprised that people kept asking him about it. Strange, he writes, what people choose to remember. That's the thing about history. Sometimes it forgets kings and remembers jesters. Sometimes it overlooks entire wars, but clings tightly to one nap on a Sunday afternoon. These letters don't scream for attention. They simply exist. Like footprints in deep grass, visible, gentle, slowly fading unless someone takes the time to trace them again. You place the letters back into the drawer with care, tucking the twine neatly around them like you've just listened to a very old friend share a favorite story for the 100th time. And still, it never gets old. The lamp hums softly. The dust settles. The candle flickers low. You push open a narrow door and step into a small chamber tucked behind the grander rooms, a place with low ceilings, a single window, and furniture that suggests comfort over ceremony. There's no velvet, no chandeliers, just a sturdy daybed, a side table, and a faded rug with a design to warn to name that this, according to some stories, was where Atchison slept during his brief, possibly accidental presidency. Not the White House, not some ornate executive suite, just this little nook tucked behind the Senate floor. A senator's lounge, some called it, others more fondly nicknamed it the bunkhouse of the Republic. You step closer to the daybed. The mattress has clearly been changed, restored, but the frame is original, hickory, handmade, a little creaky, a little short, like it was designed by someone who assumed naps should be brief, and backaches were just part of democracy. Atchison, by some accounts, napped here that day, with boots off and waistcoat undone, unaware that his name had slipped briefly into the highest office in the land. One version of the tale even suggests that a messenger tried to wake him, only to be waved off with a mumble and a request for 5 more minutes. No official papers were signed. No visitors announced. Just one man, horizontal. While the Constitution quietly shrugged its shoulders in the hallway, you sit down on the edge of the bed. It creaks under your weight, but gently, like it's used to this part of the story. The window beside you is cracked open, just enough to let in a breeze. It carries with it the smell of old wood, faint tobacco, and the kind of silence that belongs only to forgotten rooms with very good stories. You lean back slowly. The candle flickers low. You drift into a sitting room that feels like it was built for quiet evenings. The walls are lined with dark walnut panels, and a fireplace glows softly in the corner, its embers pulsing with a warm orange rhythm. No flames, just the slow breathing heart of yesterday's fire, like history itself, is dozing off in the corner. You settle into a low armchair by the hearth. It embraces you without asking questions, like an old coat found in the attic that still fits. A small side table holds a stack of notes, scribbled facts, half-finished thoughts, and quotes collected over decades by some invisible caretaker of Atchison trivia. You pick one up. David Rice Atchison was born in 1807 in Kentucky, a lawyer by trade, a senator by persistence. Another card reads, he never married, loved books, preferred horses to handshakes. A third, once gave a speech about railroads that accidentally lasted for hours. When asked what he said, he couldn't remember. You smile. These aren't the facts you find in textbooks. These are the gentle ones, the kind that sit in the background, like loyal dogs, quiet, familiar, maybe a little shaggy. The fireplace pops gently, sending up a tiny spark that fades before it touches anything. You stare into the embers, and for a moment, they almost form a face, a bearded one, eyes half-lidded, smirking slightly, like someone who knows the punchline but won't rush to deliver it. You lean back, letting the notes fall softly to the table. Some history shouts, some whispers, and some, like Atchison's, just hums quietly by the fire. Content to be remembered by those who enjoy peculiar company. The warmth wraps around you like a woolen blanket. The candle flickers low. ... You wander into a room, filled with keepsakes, odd little treasures behind glass. A pair of spectacles, a shaving brush, a monogrammed handkerchief, all arranged with the gentle pride of someone who loved the man they belonged to, but never quite bought the whole president. Story. At the far end of the room, there's a handwritten letter in a brass frame. The ink is faded, but the words are still legible, if a little wobbly with age. It's from Atchison to his mother. Dear Mother, it begins. There is talk here that I was, for a short time, the President of the United States. I assure you, it was not something I planned, nor something I noticed at the time. I did not rise to power. I do believe I slept through it entirely, and beneath it, her reply. David, she wrote in elegant cursive. If you were president and didn't even get up for it, then I see no reason to make a fuss. Write again when you do something proper. You stifle a laugh. It's the kind of motherly reply that needs no translation. Polite disbelief with a hint of teasing. History's footnote, trimmed with maternal practicality. They say she never told the neighbors, never bragged, never baked a cake. When asked, she reportedly replied, he says he was president, but he also says he was too tired to notice. In that gentle refusal to inflate the tale, something strangely lovely lingers, a grounding force, because even the maybe president still had to explain himself to his mother, and she wasn't impressed. You step back from the letters, heart warm. It's a reminder that no matter how high one rises, even accidentally, someone, somewhere, is waiting to say, don't forget your manners. A clock chimes softly in the next room. The candle flickers low. ... You now find yourself in a chamber shaped like a courtroom, but with all the tension long since drained away. The benches are polished but worn, cushions sunken with the weight of arguments too small to shout and too funny to forget. At the center, on a podium beneath a dusty chandelier, rests a law book opened to a page so frequently referenced it's been doggered into a permanent shrug. You lean over and read the passage. It outlines the Presidential Succession Act of 1792, the rule that placed the President pro tempore of the Senate next in line, after the Vice President. That's it. That's the technicality, because President Polk's term ended at noon on March 4th, 1849, and because President-elect Zachary Taylor refused to take the oath on a Sunday. There was a moment, just a breath, where the presidency was vacant. And who stood next in the line of constitutional succession? David Rice Atchison. The law didn't say he had to be awake, or ready, or even aware. It just said he was next. You imagine the framers of that law, sitting by candlelight centuries ago, quills scratching parchment, never guessing that someday their words might elevate a man by mistake, and put him to sleep in the highest office in the land. Legal scholars have bickered over this moment for decades. Some argue the presidency can't begin without an oath. Others say the term starts regardless, oath or not. A few brave souls threw up their hands entirely and moved on to easier questions, like, how many angels can dance on a filibuster? You smile, because in a way, the technicality is the charm. A nation so tangled in process. It accidentally promoted a man who never asked for the job and never did a thing with it. You sit down on one of the benches, arms resting gently at your sides. The candle flickers low. ... You wander into a quiet, rotunda, circular and echoing, where your footsteps bounce softly off the high dome above. There's a reverent hush here, as though the room itself is waiting for someone important to arrive, only they never did. In the center, a small dais. No red carpet, no spotlight. Just a single marble step, polished by time. A card resting nearby reads, "The spot where no oath was taken." You pause, reading that again. The oath. That solemn ceremonial moment where a hand is raised and a promise is spoken, firm, formal, and historically binding. The ritual that turns an elected citizen into the leader of a nation. And yet, on March 4th, 1849, that moment didn't happen. Zachary Taylor, deeply committed to honoring the Sabbath, delayed his inauguration until Monday, a choice rooted in faith. Understandable, respectable, but in the eyes of some legal minds, it left the presidency in limbo. A ceremony not yet completed, a vacuum so small it barely registered, yet large enough to raise a very strange possibility. David Rice Atchison, next in line, unsworn, unbriefed, possibly napping, was, according to this gap, technically in charge. Or maybe not, because the law is fuzzy here, like a reflection in water. Can someone be president without taking the oath? Is the office defined by action or by intention? Some historians say Atchison was never officially president because he never took the oath. Others argue the oath simply follows the term, it doesn't begin it. And Atchison himself, he didn't seem to care either way. You run your fingers along the edge of the marble platform. It's cold, smooth, unmoved by the debate. Sometimes power is loud, sometimes it's symbolic, and sometimes it's so quiet, you could sleep right through it. The rotunda exhales softly. You do too. The candle flickers low. ... The hallway you now step into feels more like a pause than a passage, long and plain, lit by high windows that scatter the late afternoon sun in sleepy strips across the floor. You walk slowly, letting the stillness wrap around you like a wool blanket. Its quiet weight, both calming and gently absurd. On the wall, a framed article titled March 4, 1849, the Sunday that broke the chain, rests crookedly, as if even the frame wasn't quite convinced of the story it holds. The article explains how, by long-standing custom, March 4th was Inauguration Day. Rain or shine, that's when power shifted, when oaths were sworn, and when a nation took its next breath forward. Except, of course, when that day fell on a Sunday. Zachary Taylor refused to take the oath on the Sabbath, not out of arrogance but reverence. He believed Sunday was for worship, not politics. And so, he waited until Monday. The decision made sense at the time. But that small pause, 12 quiet, bureaucratically undefined hours through the whole machine, just slightly off track. No one panicked. There was no revolt, but somewhere, deep inside the engine of governance, a cog slipped, and into that gentle misfire wandered David Rice Atchison, not marching, not proclaiming, just existing at the precise wrong right moment, the unscheduled star of a constitutional glitch. You imagine a room full of clerks staring at their ledgers that morning, double-checking the dates, blinking. One might have muttered, "So? Who's in charge?" And someone else probably shrugged and said, "Does it matter? It's Sunday." And that was that. You reach the end of the corridor and pause at the final window. Outside, the sunlight is gold and slow-moving, like honey poured over paper. Sometimes, history turns on purpose, and sometimes, It just rests on a Sunday. The candle flickers low. ... You step into a large, domed chamber where sound feels distant and air hangs still. The rotunda is grand, echoing with faded importance. Light spills through high windows in soft pillars, gently illuminating the dust that drifts like lazy thoughts in the afternoon air. At the center, surrounded by velvet rope, sits a single chair. It's plain, wooden, slightly curved in the back, like someone once tried to make it elegant, then gave up halfway through. A plaque in front of it reads, "Presidential chair reserved for March 4th, 1849, occupied by no one." You pause. The image is quietly absurd, an empty chair in a ceremonial room, on the very day it was meant to hold the most powerful man in the country. But instead, no one came. No hand rested on the armrest. No oath was taken. No crowd cheered. The chair simply waited. And in that waiting, something curious happened. For 12 hours, this symbol of power belonged to no one and, thus arguably, to everyone. Or perhaps, more hilariously, to David Rice Atchison, who spent that day doing exactly what this chair did. Absolutely nothing. You step closer and study the wood. It's been polished over time, but still has small nicks along the edge. A scratch on the leg. The kind of imperfections that come from being moved, sat on, forgotten, and remembered, again, like Atchison himself. A tour guide once joked that this is the most famous chair no one ever sat in. You can see why, and yet, it holds its own kind of presence. Quiet, mysterious, slightly smug. You sit on the bench just outside the velvet rope and watch the light shift on the floor. In this one room, on this one day. History pressed pause. The candle flickers low. ... The room you step into now feels more like a parlor than a gallery, modest, wood-paneled, and lined with shelves of books that no one has borrowed in decades. The lighting is soft and golden, as if the bulbs are trying not to wake the walls. On a small table near the window, you find a dusty guest book, cracked open to a page dated years after the events of 1849. The signature at the top reads, A. Jennings, Missouri State Senator, to our dear Mr. Atchison, who served with grace, dignity, and great timing. You turn the page. There are more notes, all in looping cursive. Many from visitors, proudly signing their names with "From Missouri," scribbled underneath. Some sound reverent, others sound amused. A few seem like they came for the joke, but stayed for the tea. One reads, "President for a day, but forever ours." Another, "He didn't run, he didn't campaign, he just showed up." That's the spirit. You can't help but smile. Missouri has always been a little protective of Atchison, not just because he was one of their own, but because he represents something delightfully peculiar in the American story. A man from a small town, modest and unassuming, who happened to be standing near the Constitution when no one else was looking. They didn't build him a monument, but they've never stopped talking about him. They toast to him at historical society dinners. They name parks after him. One cafe even serves the Atchison Special, a breakfast sandwich that comes with an extra napkin for emergency executive use. You sit down by the window, gazing out over a lawn no more significant than any other. But here, in this quiet place, Atchison never vanished. He simply rested, and Missouri remembers. The candle flickers low. ... You step into a smaller chamber now, almost hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain. The room is dim, but warm, and the scent of aged upholstery, old cigar smoke, and quiet laughter seems to linger in the air, like a memory that's grown too comfortable to leave. At the center is a long, overstuffed couch, its cushions sagging in the middle like it gave up on formality generations ago. There's a small embroidered pillow tucked in the corner that reads, "Reserved for presidential rests. Please knock before napping." You ease down onto the far edge. It sighs under your weight, the kind of sigh that says, finally, someone Who understands, according to the less than formal oral histories. This may have been where Atchison took his infamous presidential nap. Not in the Oval Office, not beneath the Capitol dome, but right here. In a side room built for coats and contemplation. Under the sleepy glow of a single gas lamp, they say he stretched out after lunch, tugged his boots halfway off, muttered something about worrying about it tomorrow, and drifted off. And while the world turned, while debates sputtered, and letters were delivered, David Rice Atchison may have become the most hands-off commander-in-chief the country has ever had, by literally lying down on the job. You lean back and close your eyes for a moment, imagining it the soft mumble of footsteps in the hall, a newspaper rustling, the occasional distant sneeze from a clerk buried in paperwork. History didn't knock. It just happened while he was snoring gently into a borrowed cushion. Some say you can still hear the faint sound of that nap in this room if you sit quietly enough. Not a snore, exactly. More like a yawn that never needed an apology. You let the couch cradle you. The candle flickers low. ... The next room feels almost whimsical in its defiance of importance. It's decorated like someone tried to make it stately, but got distracted halfway through by a good story. The walls are a soft blue-gray, and there's a small pedestal in the middle with a brass plate that reads, "America's only unconscious president." You stop and stare. The display above it, a pillow, an actual, modest feather pillow, white, slightly rumpled, with delicate stitching around the edge. Beside it sits a framed quote, attributed possibly jokingly to Atchison himself. "I was president, unconscious of the fact." That's not just poetic, it's precise. In any other setting, a statement like that might sound like political evasion. Here, it's just refreshingly honest. A presidency that began without awareness, lasted without effort, and ended without fanfare. You walk slowly around the pillow, trying not to disturb the museum-like quiet. There are no dramatic photos, no miniature replicas of famous battles or declarations. Just the suggestion that, for once, power didn't demand noise or attention. It simply passed by like a warm breeze over a sleeping porch. It's oddly comforting. In a world where leadership is often loud, performative, relentless, Atchison's presidency offers something different. Something wonderfully absurd. That maybe, just maybe, the Republic is strong enough to survive an executive branch powered by REM sleep. You imagine the meetings he never attended, the laws he didn't veto, the press releases never typed, and yet, no chaos, no collapse. Just a nation slowly cruising forward while its interim leader dozed, blissfully unaware of his brief brush with the highest office. You smile at the thought. There's a strange peace in it. You reach out, hover your hand over the glass casing. The pillow remains still, quiet, undisturbed. The candle flickers low. ... You step into a long, carpeted gallery, lined on either side with tall windows and wooden benches. Everything here feels leisurely, as if the room itself is reclining. The drapes hang half-drawn. The floor creaks just once, as if to say, take your time. In the center of the room, there's a brass sculpture no taller than a footstool. It's a stack of documents neatly arranged, untitled, unmarked, and, very clearly, blank. A small plaque reads, "The Senate Docket. March 4th, 1849. You grin. Because of course on the day David Rice Atchison may have been president. The Senate had nothing scheduled. Not a debate, not a vote, not even a formal recess. Legend says it was the quietest day the chamber had seen in years. A handful of senators showed up, nodded politely at one another, exchanged a few pleasantries, and then went home early. One account mentions a senator catching up on correspondence. Another supposedly practiced his signature for an hour. Atchison, as the story goes, he may have wandered through for a moment, looked around, and declared, "Well, if I'm president, I suppose I'll adjourn." It's hard to tell if that actually happened, but the idea of it a government office, so relaxed, so entirely unwound, that its highest-ranking officials simply strolled in, saw no crisis, and strolled right back out is oddly beautiful. No scandals, no press frenzy, no one pounding the table, demanding answers. Just the sound of distant hoofbeats, a breeze through the window, and the occasional scratch of a quill across a mostly empty page. You sit on one of the benches and lean back. You could stay here a while. No business pending. No orders to issue. Just time, gently passing. The candle flickers low. ... You find yourself now in a lounge-like room, the kind where curtains are always half-drawn, and no one bothers to wind the clocks anymore. There's a newspaper on the table, folded just once, and never opened again. The date, March 5th, 1849. You lift it gently. The headlines are busy with reports on Taylor's inauguration, cabinet appointments, and ceremonial details. But in the bottom corner, in the smallest font imaginable, you see a single sentence. No notable disturbances reported during transition. Washington enjoyed a peaceful Sunday. And that was it. That was how the country described its leaderless interlude, or rather, its quietly guided drift under the light, snoring stewardship of Senator David Rice Atchison. You lower the paper and look around. A globe spins lazily in the corner, the continents tilted just slightly out of proportion, as if history has softened their edges. A leather chair leans backward at a confident angle, its arms smoothed by years of relaxed elbows. You imagine America, that day steamships chugging calmly down rivers, horses clip-clopping over dusty roads, townspeople finishing their church services, and a president who didn't know he was president, choosing, perhaps wisely, not to make any sudden moves. Some people said it was undignified, others thought it was hilarious. But maybe, just maybe, it was the most honest form of governance ever achieved. Do nothing, cause no harm, let the country be, and the country in return politely went about its day. No executive orders, no sudden laws, no newsworthy events, just a nation and its temporary, possibly horizontal leader, both enjoying the rarest of political gifts, a nap. You lean back into the chair. It creaks like it's telling you, yes, yes, this is exactly the pace we meant to keep. The candle flickers low. ... The room you step into now feels quietly theatrical, as if it was designed not to inform but to gently exaggerate. Spotlights glow overhead like stage lights, casting soft halos over a central pedestal, and on that pedestal, surrounded by an ornate gold frame and just a little too much red velvet, sits a marble bust. David Rice Atchison. The plaque beneath it reads, 12th President of the United States. Maybe. You let out a soft laugh. Even. The marble seems unsure. His expression is noble. Yes, but there's something in the eyes, a subtle lift in the brow, that seems to say, even I don't know if this counts. The bust was installed decades after Atchison's death, not by presidential order or national decree, but by a local historical society determined to give their maybe president a maybe monument. Some say it was sculpted based on a description, not a photograph. Others believe the artist intentionally gave him a slightly bemused expression out of respect for the absurdity of it all. You circle the pedestal. The velvet ropes creak as you lean in. Behind the bust, etched faintly into the stone wall, is a quote. If I was president, I did nothing to disgrace the office. David R. Atchison. There it is. Again that same dry, self-aware humility. He wasn't trying to be remembered. He wasn't claiming greatness. He simply acknowledged that, if history wanted to assign him a title, he'd do his best to nap responsibly. You stand there for a moment longer, bathed in quiet light, the faint scent of stone and old fabric swirling gently around you. Sometimes a monument doesn't have to stand tall. Sometimes it just has to smile slightly and let the story speak for itself. The candle flickers low. The next room feels more like a hallway between worlds than a destination. Along the walls hang framed black and white photographs of tour guides past and present caught mid-gesture, pointing towards something that might be fact or might just be the best version of a rumor. A placard near the first frame reads, "No to guides, tell it the same way." You grin. That's the beauty of it. The legend of David Rice Atchison, President 40 or not, isn't pinned down by official record. It floats, drifts, retells itself like a bedtime story in a dozen different voices, each one slightly embellished, depending on who's asking and who's listening. Some guides call him the 12th president. Others say he was acting president. A few raise one eyebrow and say, well, he might have been, if you squint at the Constitution and read between the lines. Backwards, in Latin, one veteran guide, according to a note pinned near her photo, always ended her tour by saying, he was president, but only because no one else wanted the job that day. Honestly, I think he earned it. You continue walking, listening as faint audio recordings play from hidden speakers. Tour snippets play in soft whispers. Technically speaking, yes, Atchison was next in line. There's no record of an oath, but there is a record of a nap. What makes someone president anyway? Power? Paperwork? A pillow? It's as if the walls themselves are debating politely, amused, and in no rush to agree. You reach the end of the corridor, where one last voice speaks, slower than the rest. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but we keep telling the story, don't we? Yes, and that alone makes it real enough to remember. The candle flickers low, ... You step into the oldest chamber yet. The ceilings here are lower, as if the building itself is bowing slightly with age, and the air smells faintly of ash and waxworm, sweet, a little forgotten. Everything feels hushed, as though even the walls are listening. A single brass candlestick stands on a table at the center of the room. The candle in it is lit barely. The flame wavers with every breath you take, and shadows ripple softly across the worn stone floor, like memories too tired to stand up straight. This, they say, was the first meeting room for the Senate before it grew large and loud. Here, the important things were whispered. Disagreements stayed civil, voices rarely rose. And somewhere along this timeline, perhaps, on that very odd March 4th, David Rice Atchison might have stood quietly near this candle, entirely unaware of the responsibility that had momentarily slipped into his coat pocket. There's no official record of him being here on that day, but someone carved the initials DRA into the corner of the table, just barely visible beneath the wax drippings. Accidental, intentional, or perhaps done years later by someone who liked the sound of a myth. You run your hand along the tabletop. It's smooth from years of elbows, from note-taking, from fists gently thudding during speeches that no one remembers anymore. The candle flame dances, casting shadows that seem to smile gentle, flickering acknowledgments of stories that still linger, even when the facts are soft around the edges. It's strange how a small flame in a quiet room can feel more official than the loudest parade. You step back, letting the warmth touch your face one last time. The candle flickers low. ... This next room feels playful from the moment you step inside. There's music playing faintly, something with a banjo and a brass section. Slow and cheerful, like a parade that took a wrong turn and never quite made it back. The walls are covered with portraits, but not the solemn kind. These are caricatures with big noses, exaggerated eyebrows, and expressions that seem to say, don't take this too seriously. At the center of it all is a sign in bold script, the One-Day Presidency Club. It's not an official club, of course, but if it were, David Rice Atchison would be its founding member and possibly the only one who didn't notice he'd joined. There are a few other names floated here, presidents who served brief terms, often between resignations or assassinations. William Henry Harrison, who caught a cold at his own inauguration. Millard Fillmore, who inherited the job after Taylor's death. Brief bursts of executive power, uneven starts, quiet exits, but he's in a category all his own. Next to his caricature is a quote, displayed in hand-painted script. I never took the oath, never lifted a pen, never raised my voice. It was the easiest presidency in history. Below that, someone's added in pencil, and maybe the best. You wander among the displays, each one blending history with a wink. A desk with no inkwell, a chair labeled sat in once, then left for lunch, a gavel that appears to have been carved from butter. It's all gently ridiculous, and deeply human. You smile as you leave, passing beneath a painted banner that reads, "Some leaders change the world, others just nap through it." The music fades. The hallway quiets. The candle flickers low. ... The room you enter now feels less like part of a museum and more like someone's study warm wood paneling. Mismatched books stacked wherever they fit, and a small record player in the corner that hums softly with the scratch of an old folk tune. On the wall above a modest fireplace hangs a photograph. It's not particularly sharp or formal. David Rice Atchison stands in a field, surrounded by what appears to be a county fair. There's a pie table behind him, a ribbon pinned awkwardly to his coat. His expression is unmistakable, a knowing smirk, the face of someone who's just told a joke that got out of hand. Beneath the photo is a handwritten line, probably penned by one of his descendants. He said it once at dinner and the whole country never let him forget it, because that's how it started. One comment at a table, a playful remark at a town hall, a passing joke in a letter. I suppose I was president for a day, though I never quite noticed it. It was never meant to be a declaration, just a nudge, a grin, a story to make the guests laugh after dessert. But history, ever the mischief maker, picked it up and ran. Newspapers quoted it. Local historians latched on. Missouri schoolchildren began writing essays with titles like Our Other President. And Atchison, to his credit, didn't stop them. He just smiled wider and added, "It was a fine day to be president. I got plenty of rest." You sit in a rocking chair by the hearth. It creaks softly as you lean back, the wood moving in time with the rhythm of old stories and slow laughter. Not every legacy needs marble and medals. Some just need a good line, well told, and a world willing to laugh with you. The candle flickers. Low. ... This next room feels still, like even the air has settled down to rest. The lighting is soft, almost dusky, and the walls are decorated with quiet paintings of pastoral scenes, rolling hills, church steeples, sleepy towns. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of America that hums gently in the background of history books. In the center, there's a mural stretched across one wall, a depiction of the United States on March 4th, 1849. No fireworks, no protests, no drama. Just people going about their day, farmers in the fields, merchants at their stalls, children chasing hoops down cobblestone streets, and at the bottom of the painting, in tiny near whisper script, "During the presidency, no one knew was happening." You walk slowly along the mural, your footsteps muffled by a rug that's seen generations pass through. A child holds a flag. A woman opens a window. A horse pulls a cart loaded with sacks of flour. No one seems particularly concerned about who's in charge of the country, and that's the point. While David Rice Atchison may or may not have briefly held the presidency, the country itself didn't blink. It didn't pause. It didn't panic. It simply moved forward in the way that stable nations do, not with grand declarations, but with quiet consistency. You imagine the Capitol's clock ticking on, unnoticed, letters delivered, bells chiming, churchgoers shaking hands at the door. And somewhere, a senator sleeping through his brief moment in history, while America gently went about its business. Maybe the calmest day in government was the one where nobody governed. You stand in front of a painted porch swing at the edge of the mural, empty, still welcoming. Sometimes history roars, and sometimes It just lets you rest. The candle flickers low. ... You now step into what might be the quietest room of all. There are no spotlights here, no curated displays or velvet ropes. Just a few scattered chairs, a long wooden table, and shelves filled entirely with books that all seem to ask the same question. Was he really president? You pull a volume from the shelf, then another. They're all different, published across decades, by scholars with titles like A Constitutional Curiosity and The Sunday Succession. Some chapters make compelling arguments, others are filled with footnotes and charts. A few feel like the author was simply trying to talk themselves out of the very conclusion they just made. And somewhere on every page, in every one of these books, is the same word. Technically, you set the books down, one by one. Their pages barely whisper against the table, like they're embarrassed to be re-arguing something so deliciously uncertain. There's a chalkboard in the corner, faint math symbols, timelines, and arrows crisscross. The board in fading chalk. In one box, underlined twice, is the phrase, President. Beside it, someone's scrawled simply, "You can't help but smile," in a field that often demands certainty dates. Documents, definition. Story invites a rare kind of historical joy, the freedom to just wonder. To shrug. To imagine a man who didn't ask for power, didn't exercise it, and yet still found his name drifting gently through the presidential roster, like a leaf on a breeze. You lean back in the chair, letting the shelves of uncertain knowledge surround you like a warm blanket, stitched from questions. There's something beautiful in not knowing for sure. The candle flickers low. ... This room is lined floor to ceiling with law books, deep red and navy covers, gold leaf lettering, faded just enough to show they've been loved by hands far more patient than yours. The space smells of aged parchment, binding glue, and the soft ghost of ink that once believed it could settle every debate. You trace your finger along the spine of a particularly heavy volume titled Presidential Succession and Ambiguities. Therein, it opens with a satisfying creak, revealing crisp pages and the kind of dense language that practically hums you to sleep. You skim past phrases like interregnum authority and executive vesting ambiguity, your eyes dancing over words that sound authoritative, but never quite deliver a clear answer, and then you find it, tucked between two footnotes. Case is best described not by legal certainty, but by historical charm. You smile because for all the pages printed, arguments made, and courtrooms imagined, no one seems able or willing to pin it all down. The Constitution, usually so stern and structured, seems to have yawned, just once, just long enough, for a nap-sized presidency to slip through unnoticed. A nearby table holds a reading lamp and a folded blanket. Someone, clearly, has fallen asleep here before. You sit down, open a different book, and find a handwritten note tucked between the chapters. Sometimes the law sleeps, too. You nod, almost involuntarily. In a way, this little glitch, this soft, constitutional scissant, a flaw, it's a feature. A reminder that even the most structured systems are, occasionally, just as human and hazy as the rest of us. The legal language fades into a gentle drone as you lean back in the chair, your eyes growing heavier with every footnote. The candle flickers low. ... You now enter a narrow room where the walls are covered with calendars. Dozens of them, from different eras and places, some beautifully illustrated, others plain and practical. Most of the pages are blank, except for one day, March 4th, 1849, circled, highlighted, doodled on. One calendar even has a sleepy little stick figure in a top hat drawn beside the date. You walk slowly past them, each one marking a day that, in nearly every official sense, meant very little. No wars began, no laws passed, no groundbreaking decisions. In fact, nothing really happened. And yet, here you are. Here we all are telling the story, still sharing the oddity. remembering the man who did nothing and became a legend for it. Atchison's accidental presidency could have slipped away completely, forgotten like so many other soft glitches in time, but instead, it lingered. It nested in our collective sense of humor, our love for odd corners of history, our fondness for stories where the stakes are low and the charm is high. Because deep down, we're comforted by the idea that even the most powerful office in the world can pause for a moment, and the world won't fall apart. Maybe that's why the story matters. Not for what happened, but for what didn't. No speeches, no scandal, just stillness. And in that stillness, something stayed. You stop at a desk tucked into the back corner, where a simple calendar lies open to March 1849. Someone's written in the box for the 4th best Sunday ever. You smile, because for a day that didn't seem to matter, it certainly turned out memorable. The candle flickers low, ... You enter a small, round room, where only one thing commands your attention. A solitary wooden chair, sitting squarely in the center on a circular rug that's been worn down in a perfect ring. Almost like the space itself has been pacing. The chair isn't grand. It's not ornate. No velvet. No carving. It's the kind of chair you'd find in the back of a church, or beside a modest writing desk. But here, under a spotlight as soft as moonlight, it feels important. A card on a stand reads, "Replica of the chair reserved for the President. March 4th, 1849. Beneath that, a handwritten note in faded ink, never used, never claimed, still waiting. You walk a slow circle around it. There's no cushion, no sign of wear on the seat. The wood is smooth, but cold to the touch. Like it hasn't held the weight of history, only the possibility of it. It's strange, isn't it? We expect chairs like this to carry stories. The creak of decision-making, the lean of power, the dents left behind by those who changed the world. But this one was spared all that. No one sat here on that fabled Sunday. Not Taylor, who waited for Monday. Not Polk, whose term had ended. And Atchison, if he was president, he was far too relaxed to claim the seat. He had his boots off somewhere else. And so the chair remained untouched, unbothered, undecided. There's something poetic about that, a moment in time that never fully formed. A throne no one claimed. A seat still waiting for its weight. You rest your hand gently on the backrest. It doesn't move. It just is. You sit beside it instead, letting it stay empty. The candle flickers low. ... You enter a cheerful little room that feels like a gift shop, abandoned by time-soft lighting, shelves full of dusted trinkets, and one spinning rack that gently creaks in the corner. It holds postcards, dozens of them, some humorous, some oddly sincere. You take one, a sketch of David Rice Atchison in a rocking chair, feet propped up, a steaming mug in one hand, and a sash reading President kinda across his chest. The caption reads, "Wish you were President Hetz. Easier than you think." Another shows a hand-drawn Capitol building with clouds shaped like question marks floating above it. Beneath it, greetings from March 4th, 1849, where nobody noticed. You chuckle. It's said that in the early 1900s, someone started printing joke postcards celebrating Atchison's term. What began as a local novelty grew into a minor collector's niche. Missouri gift shops sold them. History buffs mailed them to each other like inside jokes passed across generations. One especially charming design depicts Atchison sleeping under a tree, with the line, "Leading a nation in his dreams." You pick up a few more. Some are printed in sepia, others hand-colored. There's even one written from President Atchison himself. "Dearest friend, I accomplished absolutely nothing today." Glorious. They're light-hearted, yes, but oddly moving to date. In a world where legacies are usually carved into stone, these were printed on cardstock and sent with a stamp folded bent, maybe pinned to a fridge. A paper trail of affection for a man who never asked to be remembered, and somehow, Was you slip one back onto the rack. It spins once, slowly, as if still trying to decide which way history turns. The candle flickers low. You step into a small auditorium-style room, softly lit and arranged with rows of empty chairs facing a single podium. It's quiet, no microphone, no banners, no stage decorations, just the wood-paneled walls and a single spotlight gently illuminating the podium, like it's waiting for someone who never showed up. On the podium, a crisp white paper sits beneath a glass cover. It's blank. The sign beside it reads, "The speech not delivered, David Rice Atchison's inaugural address." You smile. Of course there wasn't a speech. He wasn't officially sworn in. He didn't prepare anything. And yet, the space feels reverent, almost sacred, like a moment suspended in amber. You imagine what he might have said if he'd known. If someone had walked in with wide eyes and a copy of the Constitution under their arm and declared him president for the day, would he have stood here and cleared his throat? Would he have thanked the Senate for their support, nodded to the heavens, and announced sweeping reforms? More likely, he would have blinked, chuckled, and said something like, "Well, I suppose if I must be president, I'll make sure to finish my nap first." You take a seat in one of the worn velvet chairs. They creak softly beneath you. You can almost hear the hush of an imaginary audience waiting. Not for orders or promises, but maybe just a good story. Because sometimes, the most meaningful moments aren't spoken, they're felt. They're the silence that follows a laugh, the pause before applause, the words that were never said, but everyone still remembers. You close your eyes, imagining the speechless speech, the gentle shrug of history. The room doesn't mind. The candle flickers low. The corridor narrows now. Walls painted in the soft sepia of early photographs, and the lighting overhead dims to a warm golden hue like candlelight remembered. A single framed newspaper clipping hangs crooked on the wall. The headline reads, "Atchison claims presidency in his sleep." You pause, reading the smaller print. It's clearly written, with a smile behind the typewriter. Senator David Rice Atchison reportedly held the highest office in the land, while napping in his Senate chamber. Sources confirm he did not rise, speak, or sign anything. He did, however, snore. There's something perfectly American about it. Not the snoring part, though. That's endearing. But the idea that a man could sleep through history and still leave behind a name that echoes, not through power, but through peculiarity. You move into a small side room where a cot is made up neatly in the corner. A pair of replica boots sit beside it. A nightcap, yes. An actual striped one, yes, folded on the pillow. A small plaque reads, "The bed of the 12-hour president, possibly." You sit at the edge and feel the fabric give under your weight. The blanket smells faintly of lavender and cedar. It's cozy. It's humble. It's completely unfit for the grandeur of a presidency, which is what makes it perfect. They say Atchison always laughed about it later, that he proudly claimed to be the only president who accomplished absolutely nothing. And truly, in a world that often glorifies noise and action, maybe that kind of stillness deserves more recognition than we realize. After all, how many people can say they made it into history by doing absolutely everything wrong in just the right way? You lie back gently, eyes tracing the shape of the ceiling overhead. The candle flickers low. You ease into a narrow archive room, the kind built not for display, but for storage. There's no polished brass, no curated signs, just shelves. Quiet, wooden, breathing shelves, stacked with boxers labeled in the faded ink of people who assumed they'd be remembered but didn't mind being forgotten either. You pull one box down gently. It's heavier than expected. Inside, not much. A few folded letters, a tobacco tin, and what appears to be an unfinished game of checkers. Mid-move, but nestled between two envelopes, is a folder stamped Executive Correspondence. March 1849. You open it slowly. Inside are blank sheets. Not one or two, but a tidy stack, pristine, untouched. Each page dated, each page empty. You laugh, but softly, because it feels intentional, like the documents are part of the joke. A perfectly preserved record of nothing. Beside the stack lies a wrapper from a biscuit tin crumpled and flattened. On it, in the corner, someone has scribbled in pencil, "Lunchtime during the administration." Was it Atchison's handwriting? Maybe, maybe not. The point isn't proof. The point is poetry. This was a presidency of pauses, of ellipses, of a country that drifted forward while no one held the pen. You imagine a clerk opening this same folder years ago, expecting decisions, declarations, history, only to find silence on cream-colored paper. And yet, the silence is the story. Because sometimes leadership isn't about what you do, but what you don't do. What you let pass quietly. What you don't rush to fix when it isn't broken. You gently close the folder and return it to its box. Careful not to disturb the dust. Some stories are preserved by ink, others by absence. The candle flickers low. ... You enter a hallway lined with old portraits, the kind painted in oil so thick it almost glistens in the right light. Most of the figures are stiff and formal, swords drawn, brows furrowed, jackets stuffed with medals. But one near the end stops you. It's Atchison, of course, but this time it's different. He's standing outside, wind lightly tugging at his coat, and his beard full, confident, mildly rebellious, blows just slightly to one side. He's looking off to the horizon, not in defiance or grandeur, but as if he just spotted something mildly amusing in the distance. Maybe a squirrel, maybe a bureaucratic oversight. The frame is simple. The brass tag beneath it reads, David Rice Atchison, President, possibly. Beard, definitely. You grin. There's something undeniably presidential about that beard. Not because it's neat or regal, but because it looks like it belonged to someone who was always almost ready for anything, including an accidental presidency. They say facial hair in politics is a statement. But in Atchison's case, maybe it was just comfortable. He didn't need to prove anything. He didn't have to campaign. He didn't even have to wake up. And still, here he is, captured in paint, remembered in lore, his beard blowing gently in a story carried by wind, by time, by people who just love a good historical footnote. A small plaque to the side reads, On days of strong wind. Local legend claims you can still feel the breeze that lifted his beard on the day he almost became president. You pause in front of the portrait, and for just a moment, you swear you feel its soft air brushing your cheek. Or maybe it's just imagination. Stirred by good lighting and a great beard. The candle flickers low. ... This room is quieter than most, not from lack of visitors, but because it invites that kind of stillness. There are no velvet ropes or display cases here. Just a stone wall, clean and unassuming, with one single bronze plaque bolted at eye level. It reads, very simply, David Rice Atchison, President for a day. And beneath that, in smaller type, history can be blurry, but sometimes it's more fun that way. No flourish, no defense. Just a quiet question and an even quieter shrug. You step closer and study the edges. The bronze is slightly tarnished from decades of curious fingertips, tourists, school children, and probably more than a few skeptical historians have all stood here and asked the same thing. Was he really? And the plaque never answers. It just smiles in silence. That's the joy of it. Not everything in history has to be concrete. Sometimes we need space for the uncertain, the strange, the delightful loopholes where the paperwork goes missing and a man naps his way into national memory. Behind you, a bench invites you to sit. You do. It's not padded, but it's worn in the right way, like others have lingered here, too, letting the absurdity settle in. Was he president? The law isn't clear. The Constitution didn't plan for it. No one said no, but no one really said yes either. So we're left with a story, a legend balanced perfectly between fact and folklore, and the plaque, it doesn't demand belief. It just asks the question, and lets you answer however you like. You smile, rising slowly, the warmth of ambiguity curling like steam in a quiet room. The candle flickers low, ... The next room feels like an old library where even the books are in no hurry. The walls are lined with heavy mahogany shelves, each one full of dusty legal tomes and volumes of forgotten debates. A solitary chair sits in the middle of the room, facing a podium that, like everything else here, seems perfectly content with being still at the center of the room. A faint sound echoes, a muffled laugh, maybe, or a chuckle of quiet disbelief. It's as if the room itself is amused by the concept of debate. You sit in the chair, letting the silence curl around you, and then you imagine the scene from 1849. The Capitol is quiet. There's no rush, no burning need to decide who is in charge. Senators are gathered, yes, but there's no urgency. The nation has its executive, but who? The answer, at least on that Sunday, wasn't pressing. It wasn't even asked. Instead, history offers you a warm, gentle shrug. The debate that never truly happened could have gone on for hours. A string of unanswered questions with no stakes to raise. Who holds the power? How should the transition occur? Who claims the seat, the office, the gavel? And yet, despite the uncertainty, no one pushed for an answer. No one rallied. There were no panicked calls for clarity. It was, in a way, the most peaceful political impasse in the country's history. And perhaps that's why it resonates. Sometimes, history's most profound moments are the ones that need no resolution. The debates we never have, the questions we never ask. You sit back in the chair, letting the calmness of the room wash over you. It's not about solving the puzzle, about the quiet space where the puzzle simply exists. Unworried, the candle flickers low. ... The next space is a quiet alcove, tucked away from the main flow of the exhibit. It feels like a hidden moment in history, a soft, shadowed space, where nothing particularly grand happens. But everything feels quietly important, nonetheless. The walls here are lined with thick old tapestries, woven with intricate patterns that shimmer faintly in the dim light. At the center of the room stands a long, narrow table, with a single open book upon it, its pages blank, its edges frayed from too many years of handling. A small plaque beneath the table reads, "The silence between administrations." You stand for a moment, simply absorbing the stillness. March 4th, 1849, was a day without a president, at least in the traditional sense. The political machinery of the country was paused, suspended in that rarest of political moments, the limbo between two leaders, with no one officially holding the reins. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't even confusion. It was simply quiet, a nation moving forward with the familiar rhythm of daily life, undisturbed by the absence of one man in a large office. And in that silence, a shift occurred. Maybe it wasn't noticed at the time. Maybe it didn't make the front pages of newspapers. But the idea took root. Sometimes, things move forward without someone actively pushing them. You run your fingers lightly along the edge of the table. The wood is worn smooth, but the coolness of the surface contrasts with the warmth of the air around you. It's as though time itself has paused, here holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next. In this pause, in this interlude between leadership, the country simply carried on. No speeches, no orders, no sudden decisions, just a quiet continuation of life. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining the room as it was on that Sunday, soft light filtering through the windows, the low murmur of daily activities just outside, the calm that accompanies a transition, even one that no one quite expected. You breathe in deeply. The candle flickers low. ... You step into a small office, tucked in a corner of the building. It's modest, even a little neglected. Papers, strewn across a wooden desk, a chair that looks like it has seen its fair share of idle moments. The walls are lined with shelves, but rather than important documents, they hold small objects, trinkets, keepsakes, maybe even a few stray cups left behind. At the center of the desk, there's a leather-bound book, its pages slightly curled. You open it gently, expecting something monumental, maybe an executive order, a proclamation, something that says, "Here is where it happened. This is where power was wielded." But no, the pages are blank. Every single one. A small, handwritten note on the cover reads, "No orders were ever issued that day." You smile softly. The absence of action is almost poetic. For a man who technically held the most powerful position in the country for 12 hours, Atchison never signed a single executive order. There were no landmark decisions, no urgent papers to address, no historic speeches or momentous declarations. In fact, the only things recorded from his brief time as president are the odd footnotes in history books and the chuckles of historians who wonder aloud, what if? It's a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in history are the ones that go unnoticed, the days when no decisions are made, no changes are implemented, and everything simply carries on. You sit in the worn chair, running your hand over the desk. It feels almost sacred in its quietness, like a space reserved for reflection, not action. Sometimes history is made not by what's done, but by what's left undone. You take a deep breath. The candle flickers low. The final room is small, but filled with weight. In the center sits a long desk, unassuming, its surface cluttered with papers, old, yellowed papers that seem to have accumulated over the years, like forgotten thoughts. There's no shine here, no polish, just the feeling of years spent untouched, of a desk that has never been cleared. On the edge of the desk, a small clock ticks steady, unfaltering, marking the passage of time, but somehow not rushing it. You step closer and see that the papers are mostly blank, a few with scribbled notes in the margins. Nothing of importance. No speeches, no executive orders. Just the quiet accumulation of moments that, in the grand scheme of things, didn't need to be written down. A piece of parchment lies open, and written across the top is a phrase, "The desk that stayed still." It's a curious title, but it's fitting. In a presidency that never really happened, the desk remained still, a placeholder for something that never needed to be decided. The papers here are not important, and yet, they tell the story. They show the calm that accompanied a gap in leadership, the day when the weight of a nation's presidency was carried without an executive. No one rushed to fill the space, no frantic decisions, just a quiet pause. You run your fingers lightly over the paper. The faintest dust clings to your hand. In a way, this desk is a monument to the idea that sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing. There's no frantic rush here, no need to fill the silence with action. The country continued. Life went on, and Atchison perhaps unknowingly became a small part of history by simply allowing the world to rest. You stand still for a moment, letting the stillness of the room wash over you, feeling the quiet echo of an afternoon spent with no demands, no orders, and no expectations. And then, as if on cue, the clock ticks once more. The candle flickers low. You step into the last room, a room that feels like it was meant for forgotten thoughts. The walls are lined with bookshelves, but the shelves are half empty. Some of the books leaning to one side, as if they've simply grown tired. The light is dim here, not from neglect, but from the gentle embrace of shadows that have grown comfortable with time. In the center of the room sits a small table, simple in its design, with a few scattered papers and an old ink bottle tipped on its side, as if the ink has long since dried up. A single, cracked fountain pen lies beside it, abandoned in mid-sentence. Unfinished. A plaque on the wall reads, "The story that wasn't supposed to be told." You stop, your fingers brushing lightly across the table. It's as if the room itself is holding its breath, not wanting to disturb the quiet that's been allowed to settle here, in this small, forgotten corner. The story of David Rice Atchison rests unfinished, barely touched, and yet still quietly present. He wasn't supposed to be president, not by any grand design, not by any intention to leave a mark, but here we are, telling his story anyway. A president who did nothing, who took no oath, issued no orders, and signed no paper, yet, somehow, still became part of history. You glance at the papers on the table. They're blank, but they feel full of possibilities that might have been written down, if only there had been a reason to. But there wasn't. There was only a brief and quiet pause in history, where nothing happened. And yet, everything did, and that, in itself, is enough to make the story worth telling. You take a deep breath, absorbing the stillness around you. The room doesn't ask for answers, only acceptance. No great drama here. No turning of pages in a book of history. Just the story of a man who wasn't meant to be, who became, and who perhaps unknowingly left behind a tale that would be retold by those who saw meaning in the silence. The candle flickers low. You step out of the room, the soft murmur of footsteps echoing in the hallway that seems to stretch infinitely, like a corridor of history itself. The building feels alive with stories, both grand and small, monumental and subtle, all coiling together in the quiet spaces between moments. As you walk, you reflect on the strange yet profound legacy of David Rice at a presidency that wasn't meant to be, carried out by a man who never asked for it, never even knew he was living it. In a way, his legacy isn't one of power or action, but of a very human experience, the experience of quietly existing, of stepping into a space without realizing the world has left room for you. The gentle ebb and flow of history, you realize, doesn't always happen with loud proclamations or grand gestures. Sometimes, it happens in the spaces where nothing changes at all. It's in the moments where nothing is decided, and yet the story still unfolds. Softly, gently, like a breath caught in the middle of the day. You stop by a large window and look out at the sky. The sun is beginning to dip below the horizon, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. The day, much like Atchison's brief presidency, is fading quietly, without fanfare. Yet somehow, it feels full. You take one last look at the building, this place that holds so much of what we remember and what we forget. And in that quiet moment, you realize that some stories are best told, not by what happens, but by what doesn't. Perhaps, that is where true power lies, not in making noise, but in knowing when to rest in the stillness. The candle flickers low. ... You walk slowly toward the final door, the weight of time itself seeming to pull you forward, one step at a time. This last room feels different, like it's holding its breath, waiting for the final reflection, the last thought to be placed on the shelf and left there for good. The room is dark now, save for the soft glow of the candle in the corner. There's a simple wooden chair by the door, inviting but not demanding. You sit in it, and for a moment, everything is still. The air is cool, the quiet is deep, and outside the window, the world continues on its way. You lean back, letting your thoughts drift to the days of 1849, to that strange and almost forgotten chapter of history. The presidency that never happened. The man who held the office without realizing it. The country that kept going as if nothing had changed. Perhaps that's the greatest story of all, the story of how, sometimes, the most profound shifts in history occur when no one is watching, when no one is shouting orders or making speeches. Sometimes, history speaks most clearly when it's quiet, when it gives room for reflection, for rest. David Rice Atchison never had the chance to make his mark in the conventional sense. No treaties were signed, no armies marched, no laws were passed, but, in the gaps, in the silence between the official and the unofficial, he became something more than a footnote, He became a symbol of the unspoken power that rests in the pauses, the moments between actions, the quiet days when life continues without the need for constant leadership. You close your eyes for a moment, taking in the weight of that thought, and in the stillness of this room, surrounded by the echoes of a presidency never fully realized, you feel the quiet peace of a story well told, one that lives not in the noise, but in the silence. The candle flickers low, ... as you sit in the chair. The room around you seems to exhale, as though the very walls are content with the silence. The last flicker of candlelight dances on the floor, casting long, soft shadows that slowly melt into the corners, where time feels a little slower, a little gentler. You rise from the chair and move toward the door, the soft floorboards creaking beneath you like a farewell that is neither rushed nor sad. As you turn the handle, you look back once more at the room, and it feels, in a strange way, like closing the final chapter on a story that never truly needed an ending. David Rice Atchison's presidency, if it can even be called that, was never about the fanfare or the speeches. It was about a moment, quiet and unnoticed, when time allowed for space between the moments of grand historical events. A moment when the world kept turning without needing any great declaration. You step into the hallway, the candle's light now distant behind you. The echoes of your footsteps are the only sound, rhythmic and steady. And as you walk away from the room, you realize that sometimes the most profound legacies are the ones that remain unspoken, the stories that leave the greatest impressions, in the spaces where nothing happens. Perhaps, in the end, that's what makes them unforgettable, the power of nothingness, the ability to leave something meaningful behind without lifting a finger, without ever stepping into the spotlight. And maybe, just maybe, the quiet moments of history are the most important ones. The candle flickers low, and then it goes out. The darkness in the hallway now feels deeper, more profound, as though the absence of light is simply a reflection of the peace you've just left behind. The air seems to hum with a quiet energy, one that you can't quite explain, but that lingers in the stillness, as if something has just shifted softly, gently, without a single ripple. You walk down the corridor, the faint sound of your footsteps, mingling with the distant hum of the world outside. But it doesn't feel like time is pressing you anymore. It feels like you're moving through a space that exists without the need for urgency, a space where moments can stretch and yawn, where even history is allowed to take a nap. In the distance, the faintest light begins to appear as you near the exit, but it's not sharp or sudden. It's soft, like the last trace of a dream you don't want to wake from. You pause, standing at the threshold of this place that holds so many quiet memories, so many unspoken truths, and just as you turn to leave, you realize something. The story of David Rice Atchison isn't one that can ever truly end, not because of what was done, but because of what wasn't. His moment, though brief, lingers in the spaces where stories fade away, where history lets its breath out slowly and quietly, without fanfare. It's not the great moments that define us, but the quiet ones that slip through our grasp, the moments that echo without noise, and in those echoes, we find meaning. You step into the light, leaving the stillness behind, knowing that even in the absence of words, even in the silence of a presidency that never fully happened, something important has been shared, something that will always be remembered. The candle flickers low and fades into nothingness as you step away from the room. The light around you seems to soften, as if the very air acknowledges the end of a chapter one that wasn't meant to be loud or monumental, but still somehow profound in its quietude. The sound of your footsteps grows distant, almost as though they too are acknowledging the stillness that fills the space behind you. You walk through the dimly lit hall, the walls now feeling like old friends who know all the stories but never interrupt. There's a peaceful rhythm to the place, a slow and deliberate cadence, as if the building itself is gently winding down, settling into the memory of what it holds. And as you reach the exit, you turn back just once. The faintest outline of the door behind you, barely visible now, holds the essence of everything you've just experienced. A story told not by grand declarations, but by quiet pauses. It's a story that never truly ends, because it was never defined by beginnings or conclusions, only by moments. David Rice Atchison's brief presidency was like that, a moment suspended between the ticking of time, never rushed, never demanding, yet undeniably present in its own way. His legacy lies not in what was done, but in what was allowed to unfold, at its own pace, in the quiet space where nothing had to happen. As you step into the outside world, the cool evening air greets you like an old companion. The day has shifted into dusk, but there's no hurry, no need to rush. The world moves at its own pace, as it always does, and somehow, that feels just right. You take a deep breath, feeling the peaceful weight of the quiet moments you've just witnessed, and you realize that in the silence, in the absence of the expected, there is often the most profound beauty. The candle flickers low, and the world continues on, unhurried, just as it was meant to be. You walk out into the open, feeling the soft evening breeze carry the scent of the world outside, fresh air, distant trees, the hum of life continuing as it always does. The quiet, from inside, still lingers around you, wrapping you in its warmth, as if everything that's important has already been said. Or rather, everything that mattered has been felt. The sun is low now, just kissing the horizon with streaks of pink and gold. It's almost as if the world, too, is acknowledging that some stories don't need to end with a loud bang, but rather with a quiet fading into the dusk. You stand still for a moment, watching the light slip away, and you realize that's how the story of David Rice Atchison lives on, not in the blaring headlines or presidential inaugurations, but in the soft spaces of time where stories breathe, live, and fade quietly. It's a tale that never demanded attention, yet somehow earned its place in the fabric of history by simply being. As you take another step, your thoughts turn to the moments that pass unnoticed in your own life, the quiet times when nothing seems to change, but everything does. The small decisions, the unspoken words, the moments of stillness that carry meaning, even if we don't always recognize them. You smile softly to yourself, the world moving around you. Some stories like this one are timeless because they are simple, human, and full of quiet moments that leave their mark in ways we can't always see. You take a final deep breath, letting the peacefulness of the story linger in your heart, and, with that, you walk away to the continuing story, leaving behind the space where nothing happened, but everything mattered. The candle flickers low, and the silence remains, holding its place in time as you move further away. The last remnants of the building fade into the background, leaving only the soft rustling of the wind and the steady pulse of the world continuing on its path. There is a sense of finality now, but it's not the kind that feels like an abrupt end. It's a soft, drawn-out conclusion, like the final notes of a lullaby played by an old piano, gently fading into the night. In the distance, the sounds of everyday life are car passing, voices calling out in the distance, the creak of a door swinging open somewhere remind you that life doesn't pause. It continues. It moves forward. But in the quiet moments, in the in-between spaces, there's a story that stays with you. A quiet legacy. A story that might not make it into the textbooks or be shared by the masses, but one that lingers in the spaces between words, in the silences we often overlook. And that is the gift of David Rice Atchison's brief presidency. Unspoken reminder that not all greatness is loud. Not all moments need to be filled with action or celebration to be significant. Some stories, some people, leave their mark in ways that are quieter, more subtle but no less impactful. You take one last look at the sky, now tinged with the deep blue of twilight, and you realize that the story of Atchison doesn't need a conclusion. It doesn't need closure. It lives on in the quiet, in the pauses, in the moments of stillness that allow us to reflect and breathe. And in that quiet reflection, the story continues. The candle flickers low, and the world, as it always does, moves onward. As the night deepens, the world around you seems to slow, as though the very stars above are taking a breath. There's no rush, no demands, just the soft murmur of time passing, slowly, peacefully. The quiet is not an absence, but a presence, a reminder that even in the most unremarkable of moments, there is significance. You take a step forward, the ground beneath your feet steady and familiar, and as you move, you realize that you carry the story with you, not as a grand historical event, but as a quiet understanding, a recognition that sometimes the most important moments in life are the ones that are never recorded, the ones that never make it to the headlines or the history books. The story of David Rice, Atchison, president for a day, perhaps, but more importantly, a man who never sought the spotlight teaches you this. It's not about the noise we make, but the quiet ways we leave our mark. The moments when we don't do anything, but still, everything changes. The night air is cool, and the world around you seems to settle into its own rhythm. The trees rustle gently. The distant sounds of life continue without interruption. And somewhere, just out of reach, the story of Atchison lives on, not in the speeches he never gave, but in the quiet legacy he left behind. And with that, you realize something important. It's the quiet stories, the ones whispered in corners, the ones passed from hand to hand without fanfare, that hold the most meaning. Because they are the stories we return to, the ones we feel in our bones long after the noise has faded. As you walk on, you take that story with you, no longer just a whisper in the halls of history, but a part of the ongoing narrative of life itself. The candle flickers low, and the world continues, quietly, beautifully, onward. As you step forward into the cool night, there's a sense of gentle finality, but not the kind that feels heavy or forced. Instead, it feels like a deep, peaceful breath, a pause in the narrative of the world, like the calm before a new chapter begins. The world continues around you, ever moving, but with a soft undercurrent. The trees sway slightly, the night air carrying the weight of every silent story ever told. And as you walk, you realize that the story of David Rice Atchison, of the presidency he never fully claimed, is still being written, not with ink or with speeches, but with the quiet recognition of the moments that matter, even when no one is looking. You think of the unspoken decisions, the quiet moments where history has been shaped not by grand gestures, but by the stillness between them. In this room, in this story, you feel the truth, that even the smallest, most unnoticed moments can ripple through time, leaving behind a legacy that resounds in the places where silence is allowed to speak. Atchison may not have left an official mark, but the absence of his actions, the calm of his unassuming time in office, has left a different kind of imprint, one that asks us to pause, to reflect, and to find meaning in the spaces where nothing needs to happen. You stop, taking one last look around, feeling the weight of quiet reflection. The world will keep moving, of course. Stories will continue, but this one, this small, almost forgotten chapter, will always exist in the gentle corners of history. And in those corners, it will always resonate quietly, but deeply, just like a candle, flickering low in the darkness, casting shadows that stretch on forever. The candle flickers low, and the story, though finished here, continues in the quiet spaces of the world. As you stand there, the night around you feels like a soft blanket that wraps you in its silence. You feel the weight of time, but not as a burden. Rather, it's a gentle reminder of how the smallest moments can shape everything, even when we're not paying attention. You take a final, slow breath and realize that the story isn't over. It's never really over. Not when it's lived in the quiet spaces, in the pauses, in the moments we never thought would matter, but somehow do. It's in the stories we tell, when no one else is around, the whispers that fill the spaces between words, the times when nothing happens, and yet, everything changes. The world outside continues, just as it always does. The night deepens, and the stars begin to shine brighter, one by one, as though they too are acknowledging the quiet, gentle truth that has been shared. David Rice Atchison, in his brief moment of unintended power, left behind more than just a name. He left behind a reminder of the beauty in the unnoticed, in the pauses, in the places where nothing happens, yet everything still moves. With a final glance back at the darkened building, you smile softly. There's no need for closure, no need for grand proclamations. The quiet legacy lives on, carried not in the clamor of history, but in the peaceful, enduring silence. And so, with that thought, you step forward, into the night, into the world, where the story continues, quietly, beautifully, in ways we may never fully understand, but always feel. The candle flickers low, and the story, quietly, fades into eternity.